Airman First Class Dylan Reyes had been on runway security duty for exactly 11 days when he made the mistake that every pilot on that base would still be laughing about a year later. He saw a woman walking calmly across the taxiway toward the flight line. No escort, no visible badge, dressed in a plain flight suit with the patches removed. In his mind, that only meant one thing. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there. This is a restricted runway." She stopped. She didn't argue. She didn't even look particularly bothered. "I need to see some ID," he said. "And I need you to explain what you're doing out here." She reached for the radio clipped to her own shoulder instead, keyed it once, and said 4 words that made his stomach drop before he even understood why. "Tower, this is Reaper." The response came back almost instantly, crackling through his own radio at the same moment. "Reaper, good copy. We have your aircraft prepped and waiting on runway 2. Cleared for immediate taxi." Dylan Reyes stood frozen, radio in hand, slowly realizing he had just detained one of the most decorated fighter pilots on the entire base. Stick around, because what happens in the next 10 minutes of this story is one of the most satisfying, wrong assumption moments we've ever told on this channel. And if you love watching quiet people turn out to be the most dangerous person in the room, hit subscribe right now, because we've got a new story like this one every single week. Part 1. The Setup. Major Sarah Reaper Kessler hadn't earned that call sign by accident. 11 years into her career, she'd flown more combat sorties than most pilots on the base combined, survived 2 mechanical failures that should have ended far worse than they did, and built a reputation among her squadron for a kind of calm under pressure that younger pilots studied like scripture. The nickname Reaper wasn't given to her lightly. Squadron call signs were earned, usually through some combination of skill, reputation, and a story that got repeated in the ready room until it became legend. Hers came from a mission 3 years earlier that most people on base still talked about in hushed, respectful tones. But today, none of that mattered to the young airman standing between her and her aircraft. She'd walked out early, alone, deliberately without her usual escort, because she wanted to do her pre-flight walk-around the way she always did before a high-stakes test flight. Quietly, without fanfare, checking every inch of the aircraft with her own eyes before trusting it with her life. She'd stripped the patches off her flight suit out of habit more than anything. She preferred moving through the base without people stopping her every few feet to talk. Today, that habit was about to collide head-on with an eager young airman determined to do his job exactly by the book. Part 2. The Collision. Dylan Reyes wasn't trying to be difficult. If anything, he was trying too hard to prove himself. 11 days into his assignment on runway security, he was desperate to show his squad leader he could be trusted with real responsibility. And nothing said trustworthy quite like catching an unauthorized person walking straight toward a restricted flight line. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see identification," he repeated, more firmly this time, stepping slightly to block her path. "This area is off-limits to unescorted personnel." "I understand," she said evenly. "I fly out of this runway every week." "I don't have anyone on today's roster matching your description," he said. "No offense, but I can't just take your word for it." "None taken," she said. "That's actually the job working the way it's supposed to." That answer caught him slightly off guard. Most people he'd stopped in his short career either got defensive or tried to talk their way past him. She did neither. She just stood there, patient, almost amused, letting him work through his own procedure at his own pace. "I still need to see ID," he said again, trying to sound as authoritative as possible. "I don't have my badge on me," she admitted. "I left it in my locker. I wasn't planning on getting stopped." That was, in his mind, exactly the kind of answer that confirmed his suspicion. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the security office until we can verify." That's when she reached for her radio instead. "Tower, this is Reaper, requesting confirmation on runway 2 clearance." The response crackled back almost instantly. Reaper, good copy. We have your aircraft prepped and waiting on runway 2. Cleared for immediate taxi. Dylan felt the blood drain from his face. If you love watching the exact moment someone realizes they've made a catastrophic mistake, you're going to enjoy the rest of this story even more. But first, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we tell stories exactly like this one every single week. Part 3. The Fallout. For several long seconds, Dylan Reyes said absolutely nothing. He looked down at the radio in his hand, then back up at the woman standing calmly in front of him, then back down at the radio again, as if it might somehow take back what it had just said. You're Major Kessler, he finally managed. Reaper. I am, she said, not unkindly. And you're doing your job exactly the way you're supposed to, Airman. Don't apologize for that. I detained you, he said, his voice tight with panic. I made you stand here for 5 minutes. You asked for identification from someone you didn't recognize in a restricted area, she said. That's not detaining someone. That's a security check working the way it was designed to. I'd be more concerned if you'd just waved me through because I said the right words with enough confidence. He exhaled, visibly relieved but still rattled. I really thought I was doing the right thing. You were, she said simply. You just found out the person you stopped had a call sign instead of a visitor's badge. That's not a mistake, Airman. That's just Tuesday. He almost smiled at that, some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders. For what it's worth, ma'am, I've heard stories about you since I got here. I didn't put it together. Most people don't, she said. I don't exactly look the part people expect. Part 4. The Reckoning. Word of the runway stop spread through the squadron before Major Kessler had even finished her pre-flight checks. By the time she climbed into the cockpit 20 minutes later, half the ground crew already knew the story, and most of them found it more entertaining than alarming. Kessler herself found it mildly funny. She'd been mistaken for everything from a mechanic to a civilian contractor over the years, and an overzealous young airman doing exactly what he was trained to do barely registered as a story worth telling twice. But for Dylan, the moment stuck with him in a way he hadn't expected. That evening, still replaying the exchange in his head, he sought out his squad leader, not to confess a mistake, but to ask a question that had been bothering him since the radio crackled back with her call sign. Sir, can I ask you something? Did I mess up today? His squad leader, who'd already heard the story from 3 different people by then, actually laughed. Reyes, you stopped a decorated combat pilot from walking onto a restricted runway without proper ID. That's not a mistake. That's literally the job. She didn't seem bothered by it at all. That's because she's flown combat missions where the stakes were slightly higher than an airman asking for her badge number, his squad leader said. Kessler's earned enough respect on this base that she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, including a 19-year-old doing exactly what he's supposed to do. Dylan sat with that for a moment. So I didn't embarrass myself. You embarrassed yourself a little, his squad leader admitted, grinning. But not for the reason you think. You embarrassed yourself because you looked terrified after you found out who she was, instead of standing by the fact that you did your job correctly either way. Part 5. The Turn. 3 weeks later, Major Kessler requested Dylan Reyes by name for an escort assignment during a live-fire training exercise, a request that raised more than a few eyebrows among the senior staff, since junior airmen rarely got pulled for high-visibility assignments that early in their rotation. When someone asked her why she'd chosen him specifically, her answer was simple. Because he stopped me without knowing who I was, and he didn't back down until the radio confirmed it. That's exactly the kind of person I want standing near my aircraft. Over the following months, Dylan became something of an informal protege to her, not through any official mentorship program, but through the kind of quiet respect that builds when someone proves themselves once and keeps proving it. He learned to read aircraft the way ground crews rarely got the chance to, learned the actual reasoning behind procedures he'd only followed blindly before, and slowly stopped being the nervous 19-year-old who'd once turned pale reading a radio confirmation. A year later, when a new airman fresh out of training stopped an unfamiliar civilian contractor walking near a restricted hangar, Dylan was the one who reassured him afterward that he'd done exactly the right thing, using almost the exact words his own squad leader had used on him. "You did your job," he told the kid. "Don't apologize for that, not even if it turns out you just stopped someone with a call sign." The runway incident became something of a legend on that base. Not because Dylan had made a mistake, but because he hadn't. It became the story people told new airmen during their first week, the one that reminded everyone that the job wasn't about knowing who deserved respect on site. It was about doing things right, regardless of who happened to be standing in front of you. Closing. Here's a question for you. If you were in Dylan's position, and the person you just stopped for questioning turned out to outrank almost everyone on base, would you have felt like you failed, or like you'd done exactly what you were trained to do? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below. I want to know whether you think the rules matter more than the rank, or the other way around. If this story kept you hooked the way it did while I was putting it together, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we post a brand new story just like this one every single week. Stories about quiet, overlooked people who turn out to be exactly the person you didn't expect. Tap the notification bell too, so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next story.